Welcome, everybody. This is a short retrospective on The Living Flame of Love by our guest, Michael MacDonald. He's here with us on screen, as so many things are these days. And we take a little bit of time today to talk about the movie, how he went about filming Procoro Canada, what his thoughts are behind his approach to working with musicians, working with a choir, and just generally how life is these days for an artist in self-isolation. So first of all, welcome, Michael. It's great to have you here visually on screen. How are you these days?
I'm doing very well, Michael. Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, the same here. And as you can see, I'm trying to catch up with Michael, though I still have a little ways to go. How is life for you these days? You teach at McGill University. All the classes have been suspended, as everybody else. We're working remotely. What is the daily life for you these days?
Wow, daily life is a lot of screen time, and I'll be thinking about both as an educator, trying to stay engaged with students, thinking about the various ways that educators can engage with visual media is certainly, which is a question that has preoccupied me for the last decade or so, which is why I make documentary films and educational films. So this is when I was making that work, I was not thinking about obviously this kind of environment. But now that we are here and we're all communicating nearly exclusively, and we're trying to figure out ways to educate on using video. I find this process, this pandemic process, kind of like kind of an enhancing of the meditative process that I've been going through for the last number of years. And it's like, this is kind of an intensive period of evaluating and self-evaluating and evaluating the kind of work that I've been doing. And having meetings with other faculty members and trying to figure out what's going to happen for fall, and perhaps spending the rest of the summer planning to learn how to educate online more effectively.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost, when you talk about this, that in your creation process, in your field, like, you often look at people, look at scenes, look at the world through a screen. So as you say, it's and I think for our listeners and viewers who maybe had the chance to already watch the movie, as you were referring to the meditative aspect of like taking time to look at something either in life, in reality, or through a screen, that's almost a state of mind, as you would describe it. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started making films, so let me step back a little bit and explain where I'm coming from. So I'm an ethnomusicologist by training, and I've been attracted to ethnomusicology precisely because it asks kind of fundamental questions about what is music, and it primarily asks it from the perspective of trying to understand how any particular culture of people use music as part of their lives. I started getting into film because I thought it was a very useful tool for documenting musical culture. But soon after, and I guess this is a consequence of growing up in the music video age, soon after I started to ask what I think is a more fundamental question about the relationship of video and music. What happens to music and to video when they're brought together? And a filmmaker that I admire enormously, a filmmaker by the name of Les Blank, was interviewed by a colleague of mine in 2013. And Les Blank resisted being called a documentarian. And he thought his music films were not documentaries about music. He called them little operas. And he said, there's something that happens in the editing room when you take a piece of music and you take visuals and you put them together. And in the process of describing this, he started to stumble and try to find words. And he says, you take these notes and you make new chords, and then something new happens. And that, to me, that I think articulates the kind of experience that I've been having or kind of bumping into, with increasing clarity, maybe with increasing with a mind open to inquiry about what happens when music and visuals come together. And when I read that from him, it kind of articulated exactly what I've been feeling, is that music and visuals actually produce new kinds of chords. We can use a media to make what I think is not necessarily a new kind of music necessarily, but something that I think extends into the visual space and into our musical imaginations, that is something different than the experience of watching music performed live, or watching a document of a music performance on the stage. And when I started to think about this, I started to become more expressive with the kinds of techniques that I use as a filmmaker. I stopped thinking about myself as a documentary filmmaker and started thinking myself more as a musical artist working in the visual mode, producing these new kinds of chords, whatever they might be. And so that realization, using that idea, that meant Les Blank's metaphor of the new chords, is kind of put me as an ethnomusicologist kind of back a little bit, where I'm asking, okay, so where I started to ask questions about what music is in culture, now I'm starting to ask what music is in this visual context, or this audiovisual context. And it's interesting. It's like to find a word. So we often say we watch something when we're doing it online, but virtually none of us do it without also listening to it. But actually, what's the word for watching and listening at the same time? I don't know. If anybody's watching this and could give me a word for this, I'd really appreciate it. It's like somehow in our culture, we've separated these things where we prioritize. We're either watching or we're listening. And I think we all know that it's not a choice. We have this very, very large and very complex experience with art, with media, with performance, and that when we use technology to make it and share it in video, it produces something that we can't do just on the stage. So, as an ethnomusicologist now, I'm trying to orient my study towards the to ask the question, what is music, when we're dealing with it in this complex audiovisual world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this world right now is so dominant in everybody's life.
Yeah,
because it all jumps onto the screen. That's the only opportunity we have right now. It's interesting, this element you talk about, the creation of the opera, like taking these individual notes and elements and put them into new chords and see what happens there. In that sense, you're becoming almost like an own composer, creator, and that's quite a big responsibility, to have suddenly a new idea of what is that element, what is that new opera going to be. How do you approach that? You have a role as an ethnomusicologist, as you just described, but then also you have suddenly the role of a creator, which almost puts himself above the composer or the performer, all that, kind of like That's you have to be accountable for that in some way.
Yeah, absolutely do. And I'm gonna default back to Les Blanc for a second, and he would say when asked about his films, and the value, and to give to give a value to his films, he would often reply that the musicians, when he was making films with musicians, that the musicians really liked the films.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually writing a book currently that's going to be published in 2021 from Bloomsbury Press, and it's going to deal. There's going to be a whole section of the book that's going to deal precisely with this question. So I don't have it entirely worked out at this point, but the part of it is going to be to find some language around what this is, what this process is, and instead of using the idea of a composer, I've been playing with the idea of what I'm calling cine-worlding. That I see my job as a filmmaker and as an ethnomusicologist to produce a kind of experiential world that everyone that's been involved in it can feel like that world that is created and shared, that it is a world that they can see themselves contributing to, that they have contributed to it, that the film is a product of their contributions. So it's like, I would prefer to think of myself as a curator. I think more than a conductor. Maybe I'm curating a world like a museum curator is, or that sort of thing. So that when I received email from Peter, for instance, saying that this is something that he will be able to share perhaps with his grandchildren, that we have somehow created a world together that can move through time, that can share an experience that is temporally bound to a place, as this process is, from ideation to through your process, through the hourglass, as you explained, through the choir, the individual members of the choir, to performance. If we can use cinema as a way of creating a kind of curating a time capsule that can capture not just what happened, but how it felt, and we can allow that to move through time, then I think we've created a kind of world, kind of digital world, that hopefully that people that experience this short film and take the time to allow themselves to get into that experience, if they resonate with that experience, then I think we've done the job of making the world. And that's something that you said early on before the film was released. Take your time, find some quiet time, put on headphones, get into the film, because this is not a spoon-fed thing. Like, this is not edited to keep your attention. This film is not going to dominate you in the way that contemporary media is designed to do, to keep your attention, because there's an attention economy in TV, in films. We know that editing has been speeding up for 20 years. You go back to watch a film made 25 years ago, there are way fewer shots per minute than they are now. Now it's shots per second in many cases. This film, the first 5 minutes of the film, I think, has 3 shots. It's very slow. It's very meditative, and the tempo of the film emerged from Peter, and that's why I like to think of myself more as a curator, because I feel like the kind of filmmaking that I'm suggesting and I'm trying to build, which is what the book is going to be about, is going to suggest that these techniques have to come from the world that you are inhabiting, not not the lessons of contemporary media production, So I think the ethics are there, and the responsibility is there to kind of curate the experience that you are experiencing as you engage with the people that you're making a film with.
Mm-hmm. I find this really interesting, just the idea of curation, because when I think, and even as you say, comparing it to a museum, that's exactly what I find myself, even though I've been involved in the film and I see myself, but how it is set up with as you say, 5 minutes, I think three shots, and just the pace and the calming, this kind of peacefulness flying across Canada. It's almost like entering into a museum and getting into the mindset, and then taking in whatever is on the walls and these different artists that help create the overall image, so that maybe creating the space, creating the room, being the architect, being the curator. So I can relate to that, and I hope that viewers watching the movie that maybe can have that in mind when watching the documentary too. Another question that I just want to go maybe more into the movie itself is, we've learned a little bit about how you approach it, how Peter has shaped the pace, how you have then tried to create with each individual like a contribution that creates the whole. Within that, what were some of the surprises that you have experienced? What were things like, oh, I didn't think that would be a part of it, and this now becomes a dominant element, or even just an interaction that you thought, oh, that's really interesting, that's something new? Because if our viewers, if you want to go to Michael MacDonald's website, you can see he has done a lot of documentaries about music, and they go from punk to rap. There's a really very diverse, and here we're working with a professional chamber choir. So what were some of the surprises that you maybe have experienced working with professional singers?
Yeah, well, I think what attracted me to this project, and what made the film process so fascinating for me, is that there was nothing but surprises. And it had to do with, I was getting involved in a project that I didn't know really what it was about. As far as the score, I met the composer, and we talked about except for the little clip that's used at the very beginning, talking about those, the three notes. Yeah. I really didn't know much else that was how it was going to unfold. And I don't think it was until the dress rehearsal that I heard the entire piece together. And although you gave me a copy of the score, I didn't look at it, because I didn't want to construct this process in any particular way. I wanted let me use another metaphor. There's not exactly a metaphor. There's Guy Debord, a French kind of artist, theorist, philosopher, wrote a very famous book called The Society of the Spectacle. One of the things that he used to do, he would call it psychogeography. And he would do these, I'm pretty sure it was called psychogeography, and he would do these psychogeography walks in Paris. And he would get a whole bunch of people together, and they would pay no attention to the map. They would just walk and follow the energy of the geography, and they would just follow it, and they would allow their affective responses to the geography to determine which direction they move in. That's usually how I make films. And in this particular case, because the piece, as it was so complex, there are so many parts of making this piece and so many people involved in it, I found myself being drawn through the through the process to the end, and then letting it sit, letting the footage sit basically for the entire summer. And then I came back to it in September, and spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out how to make sense of the complexity of the entire thing. So almost every edit was a surprise. You know, every day of filming was a surprise. It was some really important ones, like going to the Orthodox service with Peter the day of the concert, and talking to Father John at the end of Mass that was fascinating. I mean, that kind of moment was so rich. The moment talking to Joseph in your kitchen after the premiere, so rich. It's just chock full. I think basically every moment in the film is one of those moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're 14 months since the premiere happened, and we just released the movie about a week ago, and we're in a very different situation right now with not being able to go outside and perform, not gather and all that. And the movie really shows that community music making to its best, bringing together people from Nova Scotia, Peter Togni, from Toronto, Joseph Petrich, and then from across Edmonton, to come and perform and rehearse and perform, first in small elements, just with the instrumentalists, and then with the choir, and also the individuals. And all of that is at the moment not possible. And just looking back, it's bittersweet in a way to think like, when can that happen again? For yourself as a filmmaker and looking at that, how do you think now about that process? And maybe even like, how would you approach something like this now? Like, what are the possibilities of us making art right now?
Yeah, that's a really powerful and difficult question. I mean, I think one of the because I think the time scale for making films of this variety is so long. Like, as you say, when did this begin? November 2018, I think, and we just released it a week ago. So that give you a sense of the time scales that I'm working with. I've got quite a few projects that I'm still working on from previous years that I'm still trying to get finished. So that's keeping me occupied at this point. But to share them, because I mean, I could share the film online, and it's the kind of experience that it's going to have. But I was really hoping that we would be able to share this film at the Metro Cinema, for instance, and all get together and have a conversation about it. I would be interested in hearing from the people that have watched the film. I honestly am at a loss. The process of making and releasing a film online is a very it's a kind of I'm used to the process in the sense that I'm used to putting them online and then letting them live whatever lives they're going to live. But I really don't know what they do, and I don't know I'm not certain what value they have. I mean, primarily, I make these films to be educational, and I plan to use them in a classroom. But now, when facing the possibility of not having a classroom, how do we think about these? How do we think about living a significant part of our lives online?
And it maybe is the element of like, this is almost a tool for community choirs and choirs across Canada to say, well, this is how a process can look like. So it's in a very educational element also for our field, as it is for your field, just from very different perspectives to come out.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, good. Well, Thank you very much, Michael McDonald, for being with us here today on screen. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was a pleasure working with you over the last almost 2 years.
Yeah,
And as you know, we go forward with Procuro Canada. The reality is that some of our offerings will be online for the foreseeable future. We certainly hope that we will have Michael McDonald behind the camera for some other of our projects. It would be great to work with you again.
likewise.
Thank you again, Michael, and thank you all for tuning in and for watching. And again, we hope that you can give us a little bit of feedback, comments on Michael's movie, The Living Flame of Love. You can go to procura.ca and you can find on the watch and listen. You can watch the movie again, and you can send us an email, and so we can be in touch and just engage with each other throughout this time. Thank you again. Thank you, Michael. Until next time.
Thank you, Michael. See
Bye.
you.